Hey guys, so what I have here is an orchestral theme that I wrote for my friend. He's attending school at Full Sail University and he's trying to make a video game. He and I have talked a lot about the game, and even though there's no guarantee that it'll be made, I thought it'd be fun to write some music for it. This was supposed to be a demo, but I ended up putting a little extra work into it, and for me personally, this is the best orchestral mix I've ever done, so I thought I'd share some of the things I learned with you. Now the game's supposed to be this survival horror adventure game, so I tried to write a theme that was a little creepy but had that adventurous flair to it. So have a listen, and then I'll talk about what's going on here. And then the theme just kind of continues to fade out, and as the piano's fading away, you can hear that thunder and the rain and the wind coming in. So yeah, that's the theme. So when you're writing orchestral music like this, it can be really intimidating because there's so many parts, there's so many instruments in the orchestra. I want to help you simplify that. I think a good way to think of the orchestra is kind of like stomp. So if you've ever sat at a table with your friends and you got one of your friends who just starts going, and then another friend goes, and then someone starts tapping on their lunchbox, and then everyone just starts adding little parts little by little, and then eventually once you got 10 or more people doing it, you end up with this huge percussion ensemble, and it sounds really cool, but each individual person is just doing something really simple. In fact, if everyone tried to do something complicated, it just gets all chaotic and jumbled. And the orchestra is exactly the same way, where each individual instrument is actually playing something super simple, like stupid simple. Sometimes you're just holding one note. If you're lucky, you get to hit two notes. But most of the time you're just hitting one note and just holding it out, or you're hitting the same note repeatedly over and over on beat. In fact, when you start, recording your ideas, you don't want to do too much in one section. Like, you don't want to just pick a string sample and then play it like a piano and start doing the low end and the high end all in one recording. You want to split all those parts up. You want to pick, say, the bass section and then just play the bass notes. And then you go up a little higher in the mid-range with the violas and play some of those middle notes, maybe play the melody there. And then as you get higher, you play those higher harmonies and things like that. And so you're just dividing all these parts and simplifying them, and then when you bring them all together, that's when you get that really big, full orchestral sound. So there are basically 4 sections to the orchestra. There's the strings, the brass, woodwinds, and the percussion. Now, if you're like me, when I think the orchestra, I tend to favor the strings, as you can probably tell. by this particular score. Usually when I'm imagining themes in my head, I usually hear the strings, and then occasionally I might hear some brass. I almost never hear the woodwinds. But if you're like that, you really want to try to use the full orchestra. Don't lean too hard on the parts you favor. For this piece, it was fine to have a lot of strings, but this piece would really be lacking if it didn't have brass and woodwinds in there. There are certain things that the brass and the woodwinds can do that the strings can't do. The strings, I like them because they're very versatile. They can be very somber and sad and really dark sounding, but they're also really gritty. And you can make them really energetic and upbeat if you want. For me, I like brass best when it's kind of heroic and when you're trying to bring in more energy into the song and just like something big. And then woodwinds are actually really nice because they're kind of like the glue in the orchestra, at least the way I use them. They really smooth things out. They complement the strings very well, and they're really good at filling in sort of the gaps between the strings and the brass. And then percussion's different because in most music, percussion is playing this straight up beat and everything is playing along with the percussion. But in orchestra, usually the percussion's just going to be accenting things. When you're trying to build up to something or emphasize a little moment, that's where the orchestra is going to kick in. The only time you really have a consistent orchestral beat is if you're doing maybe like an action cue and you've got this big tribal beat going on, which the stomp method works very well for that kind of thing, by the way. The thing to keep in mind with these 4 sections, even though they're different sections and they're different instruments, they all work basically the same way. They all have instruments that range from low to high. So in the strings, we've got bass on the low end. For brass, we've got tuba on the low end, and we've got the bassoon and the woodwinds on the low end, and then the timpani for the percussion on the low end. And then you get up a little higher, more mid-range, kind of cellos and violas and trombones and clarinets and stuff like that. And then you get up in the higher stuff, that's where the violins, the trumpets, and the oboes are. To create like a really big sound, you really want to use that range. The other useful thing about these sections is they make it a little easier to focus. For me, I tend to like to start with the strings, and once I got those working well together, I'll support those by adding brass in there, and then I will support that by adding woodwinds, and then accent certain moments by adding percussion. And I think that's the key word there, is support. That every part that you're adding needs to be supporting the orchestra. It needs to be supporting the melody or helping to build the chord progressions or the rhythm or something. If it's just adding noise and it's just there to make things bigger, it's just going to make things messy. It doesn't really need to be there. So hopefully that gives you a better idea of how to use each section of the orchestra, but we're going to go a little more in depth in part 2 coming next week. So be sure to hit that subscribe button if you don't want to miss it. Until next time.